Thank you for writing this book. I'm actually, I'm 92 pages in, and I'm loving it. I think it's just such a really clear, but at the same time educated book that will really help people to understand, that there's an emergency here, there's something going on, and I'm actually quite amused with all of the people that you're describing, these naysayers, I guess, that are sort of making everyone else think that they're silly for thinking there's actually a climate emergency. I like your descriptions of those.
Yeah, and maybe you can give us just a quick summary in a way. I know that you say it's a 2-hour read, this book.
Yeah, so I write fiction normally, and I realised a few months ago that I sort of developed quite a body of knowledge that could be written down in a non-fiction piece. And so as I started writing this book, I started reading a book called How to Go Viral. So it's basically about viral communication. So I was applying the principles of this viral communication book to what comes next, and that's how I sort of came to make it really short and punchy. It's written in the first person. And what I tried to do is I just tried to sort of, instead of trying to tell the whole story about climate change and sustainability, I just focused really on the most important piece, which is this upcoming blue ocean event, which is when all of the ice goes in the Arctic. So that's the core focus of the book, but then tries to make some, not a prognosis so much, but some scenarios about what the future holds. And that's where we've got the drowning, near drowning and learning to swim. And so I try to tell as big a story as I can, but in a small amount of time, and really trying to make the science as accessible as possible, so that people that don't generally know about climate change can play along as well.
I just want to play a 1-minute clip from CNN, because CNN is not some sort of Greenpeace organization or anything. We know CNN, right? American TV, and they interviewed meteorologists, and meteorologists again. These are scientists, these are people who talk about weather and stuff like that. And Eric Holthaus was interviewed on CNN, and the headline, you can see this clip, it's out on CNN's website. The headline is, "Climate catastrophe could hit by 2030. That is a headline, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's 12 years from now. Climate catastrophe could hit by 2030. Headline on CNN. And how we I can't believe we're not responding to that. That snooze button that we just heard about in Elizabeth May's presentation there. We definitely got to get that snooze button over to an alarm button or something. So that's what we're going to be talking more about. I just want to play this for you and the listeners, what Eric Holthaus, the meteorologist in America, said about sea level rise. He was being interviewed about what are the facts and should we be alarmed?
12 years from now, we should be well on our way to making this shift. So we're going to have, we need to have 50% lower carbon emissions in every country in the world in order to get on that track to prevent this catastrophic sea level rise from happening. So this could potentially impact every coastal city on the planet. It's not just choosing which cities are most vulnerable, but it's every city. And that's what I think is starting to finally hit through to people, is that this is not something that anyone's going to be able to escape. This is going to affect everyone, and we're all part of the answer. We're all part of switching society into a world that can recognize we're part of an ecosystem here. We're part of a living planet, and we all depend on each other. And I think that's what is finally starting to come through in the last couple of days after this IPCC report, is that finally those scientists are just sort of pulling the lid off of what we've known for a long time and saying it's now or never.
Said Eric Holthaus on CNN. So you have that same approach in a way, that you see the sea level rise is actually the biggest, most scary thing of them all? Because there are a lot of impacts. We've talked about, floodings, we talked about bushfires and all the other aspects of, when we have cyclones up in Queensland and so on. But you're seeing sea level rise as the most serious of them all.
Well, I mean, that's certainly the one that is sort of most structural in a way, and it's a slow creeping thing that you just can't really stop. It's like the runaway train almost. In the book, I talk about the blue ocean event, which is when the Arctic ice melts sometime in the next few years. Every summertime, the Arctic ice shrinks down, and then sometime in the next few years it will all be gone. And when that happens, that will make a very fundamental thermodynamic shift in the energy balance of particularly the northern hemisphere where most of the people live. So that's what I focus on in the book. And sea level rise is, of course, just one of dozens of climate change impacts. And, of course, climate change is just one of 9 of the planetary boundaries which have all been broken through by the growth of the human civilization.
Now, get quickly then to the solution part. What do we do?
Well, very interesting, because it seems like since this IPCC 1.5C report has come out and CNN is running stories like that one, it seems that there's actually been a bit of a shift around the world, and it's now being discussed openly in the mainstream media, which really wasn't happening, say, even a year ago. The frame that I refer to in the book is called climate restoration, and climate restoration is an idea that's come out of some entrepreneurs in America, notably a fellow called Peter Fikowski, who's looked at the climate change problem and said that the real what we really ought to be doing is actually getting the climate back to the way that it was. So that give our grandchildren the climate that our grandparents had. And so the model that he's developed is called climate restoration, and it seeks to basically get back to 300 parts per million CO2 by 2050. And the way to do that is to simultaneously turn off the fossil fuel generators by mid-century and pull 1.4 trillion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere by that time as well. So that's sort of the scale of what needs to happen at a global level. Where do individuals fit in with that? Well, that really depends on the individuals and where they see their strengths lying.
I hear everyone saying that this is a systematic change. You know, this is not just little things. It's not enough anymore to change a few light bulbs and insulate your house with double-glazed windows. This is a much bigger change into society as a whole. But so does it make any sense that we do anything as individuals actually?
Well, part of the big societal shift will be that there will be much greater energy efficiency in domestic environments, and so yes, everybody ought to be doing that. But that's sort of like that's the ground level stuff. What really needs to happen, the biggest challenge of all actually is not technological, because the technology that we don't have we can invent if we need it. And it's not money either, because we hand out trillions of dollars every year of subsidies to the fossil fuels. So if we just started diverting that money towards this transition, we'd have plenty of cash for it. The problem is power, and I talk about power in the book. I refer to a book called Superclass. And really the fundamental and the only problem of sustainability is that the people who run our societies are the fossil fuel magnates, ultimately. And they don't want to give up because they have this strange delusion that somehow they're going to survive whatever comes next, or they simply don't think about it. So at the end of the day, that's where we've got to figure out what to do. And one of the tools we've got for that is democratic institutions, and there's all sorts of other tools, investigative journalism, and but ultimately that's the logjam. That's the bit that's missing. It's how to get the people who are in power in the world out of power, or have them, allow this transition to take place.
Step aside, please. Well, we have a new generation coming up. Maybe they can do something that we aren't able to do.
Well, if they can detach from their screens for long enough.
Yeah.
Do you think that eventually, if we get that far, that it will be a turnaround in power, that the younger generation, when they are in power, will they be making decisions that we're talking about now?
Well, it'll be too late. I think that'll be too late. We need something. Yeah. We need something that happens tomorrow. And ultimately, this younger generation are poor, and the generation that's got power, the baby boomer generation, they've got all the money and the resources. So, we're probably going into a period of economic decline, and so it's not like the younger generation are going to boom in their wealth. So it's going to need to be something more dramatic. Those people will eventually have positions of power simply as they get older. Happen.
How do we shift the people in power now? How do we shift their thinking?
Well, look what we saw in Wentworth. That was actually a shift, wasn't it? It's supposed to be the biggest landslide in history almost here in Australia. 20% moved from one party and over to an independent. 20% in one election.
Well, that is one way of doing it, is through the polls. Now, there's also a concern that it doesn't really matter which party is in power.
True.
This is it.
Are still running the country, right? So that, and then that's just part of this sort of unknowableness about this equation. But ultimately, democratic process is a part of it. The other part of it is things like in the courts, and so what we're seeing now with Exxon News, so this is the world's biggest oil company, has actually had the best climate science back in the 80s, and not only did they not pass on that information and act accordingly, they actually subverted the truth, and so Exxon has now been sued, not for being, evil crooks, but for having basically defrauded shareholders by not taking appropriate action. So that's another pathway.
Yeah.
The other pathway is just through the exposure of power. And so if you look at this Jamal Khashoggi case right now, with this brutal murder of this journalist in Ankara, what you're seeing there is how power actually operates laid bare. They lie, they murder, do all sorts of things. And so this is just starting to put the ideas into the mind of the public. The people who are running the world aren't the right people because they're deranged psychopaths. I don't use that word lightly. I mean, you look at the decisions they're making by holding on to fossil fuels. They're looking at potentially putting 7,300 million human beings into another Permian extinction, which will wipe out most of life on Earth. And so what we need to do is we need to start approaching this problem with the sense of the scale of the problem. We need to bring solutions to bear that are commensurate with the nature of the problem, and the problem is dire, because what the IPCC report is saying is it is a Herculean task to avoid 1.5, and we're actually on a path to 3 degrees, and 2 degrees is the point beyond which the whole system just falls apart. So we're basically on the pathway to an extinction event, and it's a Herculean task in order to avoid that, and the people that are standing away are the most powerful people in the world, and every day they maintain their power because we keep buying their fossil fuels.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, and this is what we keep talking about. We've seen it coming for a while here in the Sustainable Hour. But the other thing is that we can actually do it if we get ourselves together. We are enough people in this world to turn over these 1%, 10% who sit on that power. Well, it's happened before, it's been done before, it can be done again. And as you say, when it's this important.
Exactly. So I mean, the classic case is the French Revolution, where they eventually, chopped the king's head off. I don't know the details there, but I dare say that the king wasn't, or maybe the most powerful person. It was the merchants that were bankrolling the king that probably didn't get their heads cut off. So, I mean, at the end of the day, and this is what the book Superclass says, he says there's always going to be an elite. We're always going to be ruled. He says, but if the elite are constantly making bad decisions, then we've got a problem. So ultimately, it's not necessarily about getting rid of this ruling elite per se. It's just forcing their hand to start making sensible decisions. Because if the most powerful people in the world said, okay, let's do a transition to carbon, let's do it really quickly, and let's meet 1.5, well, there's your problem solved.
That's right.
Okay. And then they don't have to, and then they avoid having to go into a permitting.
And as Elizabeth May said earlier in our show today, that could have been done. That decision could have been made in 1988, when in Toronto this was being discussed. And everyone knew what the problem was, and they could have made this law that said, we're going to put a tax on fossil fuels so people will stop buying as much of it, et cetera, et cetera. It could have been done 30 years ago.
Exactly.
Now, Guy Lane, just
left it right to the last moment.
This sounds really, really good. I'd love to talk with you for a full hour. I know you've done that already, so we'll put out links to other podcasts that you have been doing about the book and everything, so people who want to hear more of what you're saying can hear that through the links that we put out on our Facebook page, on our blog, and so on. But tell our listeners right now, that book, how do you get hold of it? Like you say, what comes next? What is the next step if you want to get your book?
Yeah, so go to guylane.com. If you go to guylane.com, there's a link to it there. There's also links to Mr. Blue Sky, which is a new non-fiction, really punchy 1-hour read that brings in these same ideas as well. And there's links also to all of the other fiction titles. So guylane.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Guy, and best of luck with it. How much does the book cost?
I think it's about $4.99.
No kidding.
That's my ebook. Yeah.
$4. Wow.
Yeah.
That should be a bestseller. Let's make it go viral, hey?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was written to go viral.
Yeah, I'll certainly share it.
We'll do what we can, Guy. That's great.
Right.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
The Sustainable Hour.
For a green, clean, sustainable Geelong. The Sustainable Hour.